Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started now. Yeah. Hi. My name's Will. I'm the communications director here at the project, and I'm so excited. This is a last in-person event of our season, and I'm really thrilled. I'm really thrilled to be here to celebrate Lyn Hejinian's Lola the Interpreter. Thank you all very much for coming. I think this is a book that kind of insists to speak for itself, so we'll just dive right in. Just brief housekeeping. There's 2 all-gender restrooms upstairs, and then there's an accessible bathroom on this floor across the sanctuary, and I think tonight that door is actually unlocked. You usually need a staff person to open it for you, but I think tonight if you need an accessible bathroom, you can just go right through. The vision for tonight, the book is in 7 sections, and I've invited 7 readers, and they'll all read from their assigned section for like 8 to 10-ish minutes, so we'll get a lovely little choral reading of this beautiful book. We have copies over there. If you haven't purchased one yet, please do so. Yeah, it's a fantastic text. I'm so happy to be here. So I will call up the first person and then the other readers, just so I don't have to keep running up to the podium. If we have the little list up here for you, if you could just read the next person's name. So we'll get started tonight with Ayazmor Tolyu.
Thank you, Will. Thank you to the volunteers, to Serene, to Noah, to Heather. Okay. I never met Hejinian, but sometimes I feel like I did. She was a mentor, friend, and comrade to my dear mentor, friend, and comrade, Samia Rahimtullah, who studied with her at Berkeley. Following her death, for a special issue of Jacket 2 that I'm assuming many of you have read, Samia wrote about Hejinian as a landscape artist, someone who knew landscape was, quote, a vibrational field of reversible effects. That's from the Language of Inquiry. Hejinian is the poet that I turn to when I do not want to write or don't know how, and she breaks open language for me, makes it possible, reminds me that poetry at its best makes landscapes. Within and through the sentence, reference, perspective, myopic or expansive or otherwise. It's an honor to read from Lola tonight, sharing this podium with many others I deeply admire. Thank you, Lyn, for making so much possible. And Lola is a novel, technically, if you didn't know. So what of it? I'm gaining the greatest pleasure from my current secretarial tasks, the invention of order and distribution of disordered thoughts and useless, dysfunctional desires over topographical undulations, rivulets, back alleys, and storm drains where they can thunder and burble and romp and prompt compassion here and fury there. Perhaps such tasks are proper grounds for a politics. Lola would object that the things that surge past or tumble by are just quickly and peremptorily thought-out whims, to which I'd retort, they are flapping from files and will pile into middens with architectural as well as columnar effect. Or I'd say they are barrels in a ring, a reference that makes her laugh, since at least for a moment we acknowledge that while performing the role of a gadfly with the powers of an unmastered urchin, she is also a dauntless barrel racer. The fact is that night has never yet unhorsed her. But let me return to my tasks, opening files to interpretation. Here's a wistful prediction that Camus recorded in October 1940. This wind cannot last if each and every one of us calmly affirms that the wind smells bad. Let's imagine Camus in an apostrophizing mood, as with Mediterranean fatalism, he poses a rhetorical question to the sky or an outspread sheet of paper. "Oh, star, did you see the tide under the clouds?" With such a sentence signaling a moment, calm is restored, then disturbed, and this, as Rosie Consuela Hassan would insist, justifies punctuation, or at least the comma. Written with a light hand, which is to say by applying a pen so that it makes only the gentlest of landings on a page, touching down only briefly and sporadically and hardly at all, and with minimal to no calculation, commas appear, one after another, just as stars appear as the night sky darkens. With things I can see, like a pair of cowboy boots, a bicycle chained to a fence, a sprawl of nasturtium flowers, a plastic bowl, a child on a swing, as with things I cannot see, like time, suffering, knowledge, black holes, and we, I'll play the phenomenal world's ongoing game of hide and seek. Carried forward by intuitions and curiosity, perception reaches the limits of logic and passes over them. Fort da. We're just overhearing a toddler at play. They say it's Freud's grandson Ernst, who has a toy attached to a string, repeatedly discovering the principle of return. But how innocent is the pleasure of discovery? Say a human, some specific fastidious one, let's call it Monty Michael Leary, thinks about what's real in order to pull it, mold it, nurture it, pierce it, all the while assuming that every discernible phenomenon is unique and material, each manifestation just a scrap of launched particularized stuff. The conscious mind can have a strong impression of a blind window on a blank wall, or of an acidic sycamore on an urban street, or of a goldfish gasping in a glass of wine, or of a scrappy rat body scurrying, heaving, swaying through a city. Meanwhile, underlying consciousness lies the unconscious, lodged in the throat, perhaps, or pressing against the viscera or the genitals. So what is the mind that something appears in it? And how very different from each other are water-borne insects, crepuscular rag rugs, and a fungus ring in a forest? What can a human understand? What empathies, what changes of mind or perspective can she or he or they or it embrace when surrounded by a reality imbued with what is unavailable? When, by being unavailable, things assert their alienation from human interests. Before I can deal with specious questions, a waking dream comes to me of weakness buoyed by Cheerios. I am reproached and fall back to participate in the widespread laxity that we interpret as getting along by going nowhere immediately or almost. A human such as Monty Michael Leary would say that to win a phenomenal game, one must invent interpretive strategies anew with every phenomenal form that one encounters. The winner, then, will be what Nietzsche in On Truth and Lies in the non-moral sense calls that master of deception, the intellect. If so, then so much for that great discontinuity life. As a teenager, Lola might have asked, if a tree falls, does it, etc., etc. Yes, of course, because there's never no one. There's always something, with the fall of trees reverberating even in winter beside a creek rising under heavy rainfall. Every event has its own sound form, its own thought stack, its own noise construction. One can feel the full thrill of the event of the fall's irrelevance to the human world. It has dodged the prison house of human history. Coos from the pigeon fancier's yard continue in full compliance with the gleaming steel sky. Why remember anything? The resulting stories mean nothing. They are empty of everything but musty odors, old shit. What time is it, you ask? It's a dissevered time, time split through the middle, time caught not quite on the dot, but definitely on the line, half of now on one side and now's other half on the other, through the long now we never quit. That, or rather this, can't be nullified. Black sweater, black skirt, gray hair. I pass through Pug Blade Alley and, turning left onto Flagrant Street, I see a weave of shadows spread across an ochre facade. I am alive, part of the present, which is drawn out of the past. What in the past was in the future included me, making me almost also a presence, though not yet present, in the past. Or maybe not. As humans conceive of it, history, often occluded but also cruel, indifferent, destructive, stupid, doesn't provide a home for every moment. Yet history, insofar as history is a term for all that has happened, fate might be another, exceeds human historiography and includes not only all that is remembered, but all that is memorable, which is to say everything, including the sound of the falling tree and the moss, twigs, redwood sorrel, and ferns onto which it fell. Roland Barthes, in The Neutral, speaks of Michelet's ambition to give memory back to everything. Does this mean that everything that exists will be remembered, or that everything that exists would be remembering? And on the basis of what? Or since we should narrow our options lest we drift into an infinite expanse of possibility as featureless as the void, on the basis of experience or of simple perception? Thank you. Next we have Colin Vanderberg.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Will and to all the staff and organizers and volunteers of the Poetry Project. It's such a joy to be here tonight. Reading from this really amazing book. I similarly never had the pleasure of meeting Lyn Hejinian. I've come to her work only as a reader and student, and now occasionally teacher. But you know, her writing is truly one of those sort of I think renewable resources of the language, and hold so much for all of us. And so I'll be reading from part 2 of the book, the section that begins on page 25 for anyone following along. It's not unusual for a cat to jump onto a seated person's lap. It's not unusual for a cat to lounge there, so to speak, purring and producing effects. In this case, a sense of calming, affective pleasure, what one might term love, which overrides a competing sense of displeasing difficulty. The cat has draped itself over my left arm. Or a momentary pain. The cat extends its claws against my lap. When I try to open my notebook and jot down some thoughts in response to what I have just been reading. We are back in the present tense of the second week of February, a pleasant warmth on my lap. The room is slightly chilly. A residue of orange and white cat hairs when the cat inexplicably jumps off my lap and walks away. But as usual, we can't set aside the possibility that I am simply telling a lie. But inadvertently now. Let's grant my honesty, but doubt or at least question my perceptions and my judgment and the grounds on which I base that judgment, general, though by no means specialized, familiarity with an animal commonly called a cat, at least in English. The phrase commonly called is important. We know the world, though we may not understand the world, largely by name. What if my perceptions were inaccurate? What if there were no cat? No city with its crushing concrete suppressing its muttering creaks? A boundary stone has been put in place. By whom and when needn't concern us at the moment. It sets the limit beyond which one cannot go. Some guy kicks the boundary stone, pushes against it, and rolls it farther along or rolls it away altogether. Whenever the boundary stone comes to a stop, it will set a new limit for someone else who comes upon it. She, in time, will roll it farther. So it will go. Each roll of the boundary stone reaffirms the mobility of limits. Hey, they've figured out a way to beat the fucking system. There's an almost ethical character to what Husserl calls a, quote, modification of belief, not toward what he calls the, quote, neutrality modification, which basically involves resting on an assumption, that manifestation of, quote, neutral consciousness characterized by, quote, merely thinking what is performed without helping to bring it about, but rather toward skepticism and a transmutation of belief into a change of mind, a change of perspective, even an escape from, or at least a clear critical view of commanding ideologies and their guardposts. Of course, one believes one's narratives because one wants systems and the stability and rationalizations they provide. Poems appear, composed in insubordinate I-ams, celery I-ams, axle I-ams, and even political I-ams. There's little in Lola's contemporary human milieu that hasn't been or won't be weaponized for political ends. Masks, beards, hats, schools, clocks, meat, cotton, they have all, at one point or another, been weaponized. Not so far from childhood, what does Lola overlook as she walks from home to work? As if they were people out for a walk on a city street during a pandemic, the pedestrians going about their barren business resemble zombies. They are both present and absent, as she, with her fused parts, feels she is with respect to herself, so far from childhood. Famously, Penelope weaves, perpetually bound to domestic labor. Artful at twilight and artless at dawn, she begins again. Such is her odyssey. Sensation and sentiment are mediated by erotic thought, swarming with conscious and unconscious contradictions. O peak and pit, you win. Penelope's shuttle flies, her scissors flail. Penelope is hot with anger, restless with yearning. Flinging aside the embittering monotony of unacclaiming, unchimed time, Penelope pulls away. Then she returns without a flaw. You say that reappearances are mortal, erased in a blink? From there, abstraction is not far away, though it took painters many centuries to develop the logic that allowed it. And now, that woman has no boundaries. Inside the bank, Cordelia Katrina Cabanatuan stands behind the bulletproof glass shield, counting cash. Timeless, says Joasi Zhdanov Jones. Cordelia Katrina Kabanatwan either doesn't hear her, or doesn't understand, or doesn't care. Cordelia Katrina turns to the desktop electronic cash counting machine and watches the bills flip through their recount. The sum holds its own. Wet ochres and siennas clog the curbside storm drains. An illegible short receipt from Safeway and a brown paper napkin from a takeout place are wedged into the trodden, soggy sycamore leaves that have dropped from a street tree. Faculties of perception are said to be powers, but powers to what end, and how often, if ever, are those powers not political in intent? Cordelia Katrina looks back at Joasi Zhdanov Jones, but not over the left shoulder, or is it the right? Death lurks over one of them, or so she's been told. Death, the entirety of the past, the world before she was born, and the future, the world as it will be without her. The existence of time, if one can speak of its having existence, properly speaking, time, however complexly is the medium for existence, precludes the possibility of total freedom, and therefore it precludes the possibility of any freedom at all, since freedom is either total or it doesn't exist. But why, one might ask, does time preclude freedom? History introduces discrepancies, and discrepancies provide the grounds for new interpretations, producing new perspectives that assume different realities from those that precede discrepancies, whether they are acknowledged by a measuring scientist or a boastful parent. O Neanderthals, O Paleolithic cave dwellers, O Viking raiders, O Mongol hordes, O people preserved in peat bogs, the ballast that balanced your boats has been thrown overboard. It is to you that time pertains. I am king of usage. I use, says Jonah Giacomo Martin, gesturing with his fork over a slice of pizza. And I, says Reggie Clara Toss, waving her pencil and order pad, am queen of usage. I'm used. You can't equate passivity with mindlessness, and we are so over gender binaries. There are many kinds of skeptics, including those who, pulled one way and then another, more by conscientious curiosity than dismissive doubt, remain perpetually inconsequential, and those who, like Lola, young as she is, engineer their skepticism to speed through middling meadows like intelligence through the logic of conspiracy theories. But one way or another, we all extend our bodies through space at different rates, plodding or dashing, tromping or scurrying, dallying or racing, and so forth, forth of necessity. 3 strolling, or let's say ambling, indecisively, aimlessly, slowly for sure. Mount Foot Avenue pedestrians occupy the do-it-yourself space that uncurious, hurrying, impatient pedestrians feel a right to rush through. And that story, pure fiction, solely invented here as it is continuous with our own. I am just one of many irritable, efficiency-demonstrating pedestrians pressing past as I mutter, "Excuse me," in protest, righteous in my unironic sense of my importance. But too soon I'll get to a subsequent day, quote, a corner made of red mud. Or not. Everything I say is a lie, I say, and Lola shrugs as she smiles. You're shifting from skepticism to paradox. That's so totally pessimistic. Everything begins, but from something. And something too began and continues to begin. Continuities are synchronous with beginnings. Or one could say continuities are, well, continuous with beginnings. Tony Van Heuvel gestures with the mic in his hand toward the ceramic cluster of forms on exhibit. Nowhere is the historical continuity of art absent, he says, so where do we see it here? No forms without precedents, Sammy Jane Jenkins says. I'm not thinking of Plato, Sammy adds. You're talking about material form, particularity, not ideals, then? Behind Tony Van Heuvel, there's an open window, but beyond it, there's nothing to be seen. No reference points, no objects, no signs. It's blank, but without even showing a blank. He might be backed by death. Thanks. And next up is Rachel Gwynn Wilson.
Hi. Thanks. I'm very glad to be here. And this book is so beautiful. So I'm happy that we're celebrating it together. I didn't prepare anything to really say because I felt like I would use my whole time if I tried. And I just am thinking about the way that Lyn's work is like, always, she's the master of the open text, and this sense that we can keep returning to it, and it sets meaning in motion. I think that's a phrase from The Rejection of Closure. Postpones the completion of thought indefinitely. And I think that's something that I've been thinking about in this book in particular. So I'm reading from section 3, and I'm gonna flip around a lot. So this is kind of in a few pages. Every performance and all performativity is tantamount to transition, mended when what grass lift is, and slippage slap bow in metal drift if. Suspense is exhausting but inexhaustible, and it is insolent, perhaps because it thrives on the insufficiencies of the present, the untenability of our prospects for the future. One can't be a scholar of the future, one can't learn from it, one can't even learn about it. You think it's a man in the distance coming along the country road, but as Husserl remarks, it might be a tree moving in the wind, which in the gloom of the late afternoon at the edge of the field resembles a man in motion. We define things by their peripheries, their proximities, the things around them to which they are bound but from which they differ. Trust has little to do with it. We cast out tendrils of interpretation as if with a paranoic's perspicacity and lucidity. To establish the character and value of something, we negotiate with the future, we barter with what we think we see ahead, what we expect to come. We traffic in what we hope for, what we fear, what we can't finish by ourselves. 5 city pigeons fly into the air, driven from their perch under the eaves of a gray house by a homeowner bombarding them with tennis balls. A disheveled man goes by pulling a wagon and shouting curses to the curb and then to the corner store. Brother fuck, mother mouth, turd on a rock in your face. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Definitely. One should nurture one's private sensibility, one's inner life. One should deploy it in social spaces, pitch in, speak up, participate in public life. You can belong where you are for a moment. When everything gets loud enough, which is to say when sounds coalesce into a din, everything achieves synchrony, orchestration, and synonymy. To live aesthetically, to live in terms of, to live in the context and limits of the phenomenal world, and perhaps interpretations of it, to live facing outward without seizing or capturing or otherwise possessing phenomena, this is to live in terms of surfaces. Things surface, things come to the surface, etc. It's not just there that we find something as indeterminate as a ricochet, something erratic, demanding decision, something for which we or you or I or she or they or one or he or someone has to take responsibility. In a burst of enthusiasm, I embarrass myself with a burst of enthusiasm. So be it. The phenomenal world is what there is. Material particulars, happenstantial circumstances, everyday life. Why speak of futurity, a metaphysical imposition, an empty category into which anything might enter but nothing has? Perhaps we do so because it offers prospects of what's ahead, far from the importunate past, and this may be key without promises. The force of eros, the barbs and bewilderments, the obliterating passions, and dare we say pulsations, the relentless throbbing and irritable insistences of eros, and let's not limit eroticism just to sex, may be ubiquitous, they may be banal, but let's credit them with pushing us along, taking us, for example, on yet another intellectual promenade, with stopovers, nominal, adverbial, prepositional, participial, street, drunkenly, twig, for gab, compatibly starch. Every word is an iteration, each testing for something, accuracy, insight, truth, whatever that might be, seeking successively closer approximations to the solution of a problem. And there it is. Skepticism makes too many demands. Lola is never overly eager to join together things that have no connections, and with that to create a story pitting fact against fact. But what of clowns, tightrope walkers, a lion tamer, a parade of elephants? I don't buy that they're shadow forms under a big top. They're feeling points, they're proximities. Animated by sudden, world-bound, out-facing feelings, Lola laughs with both hands in the air. Here's to the raptures of proximity. The future takes many things away, even before we get to them. But not knowing what they might have been, we can't give a thought to them. We will return to the perplexing existence of thought in due course. Meanwhile, though, many futures are effaced from futurity. Already existing futures proliferate all around us. The planet, despite the ruination that is spreading over it, still provides plenty of fertile ground. The wind blusters, the setting sun swirls around battleship gray passing clouds. That's all wrong, of course. It's the planet that's turning away from the sun, and the clouds are passing above and below it. But just as there are thoughts one can't think, thoughts that humans don't have brain or mind for, there are thoughts we can think and do, even though they are the products of language. Imaginative concepts leading to perceptual errors and perceptual pleasures. But I'm just puffing out loud now like a passenger train on passing tracks whistling through an empty intersection. But it's thus that we'll get to the problem of thought. Blunder watch do is for closely language on. Lola challenges art to justify itself with some perceptible point to its story. Clearly there's no point in applying poetry to itself or to war, she says. I acquiesce, it being the duty, it being the right of the old to yield to the young in a family. Maybe the point of historicism is not that it looks to the past for an understanding of the present, but that in looking to the past, it seeks to pause the present, to save it from itself. Language, like the wrinkling sea, is a satirical success with the power to wield negatives over the oceanic materiality of the phenomenal world. It changes names and things, beings disappear from the already concealed story. Named, nameless, renamed, misnamed, one still cannot be the organizer or stager of the event we call void, the drama we call an abyss. In front of his house, Monty Michael Leary continues his battle with the pigeons roosting under the eaves, watching for a break in the traffic, and then throwing carefully aimed tennis balls at the perched birds from the middle of Rusty Street. Looking out beyond the surface-bound and space-shy shadows playing over the pavement and curb under the street-side sycamore tree sits an errant, glowing buttercup, edged in black. It's not alone in the landscape of fringed objectivity, and displays no compulsion to flaunt understanding. There it is over oval, dark green leaves, flagrant in the current context, the dreary square of exposed ground left free for a tree when the sidewalk was laid, vulnerable to the piss or shit of a dog, bright on a random Wednesday, Odin's Day or Mercury's. We should be amazed. We should have the energy for that, and the attention span. As for a paragraph like this one, here it sits, in the least object-oriented of the arts, full not of things but of a language for things. And yet, the infamous gap between word and world is usually little more than a crack, a squiggle through a surface, a delicate fissure, a reminder that language is an addition to, not a murky substitute for, the scrutable world. The crack is for real, though. Depending on size or inclination, one can step into it or step over it. In the process, understanding is suspended, knowledge drops, but a crack in the ground, even a crack right through it, it's not meaning's abyss. Ask any cow about unstable grounds or any goose about uncertain terms, and she'll agree, like any mother applying herself to a place in a field, forest, ocean, tide pool, or room, whether she's a doe, a hen, a bitch, a mare, lioness, ewe, Jenny, vixen, nanny, Jill, peahen, hind, dam, tigress, Angeline, woman, or sow. It's only with immortality, if that's what comes at the end of mortality, irrevocable absence, incomprehensible non-being, that the gap between words and world reveals meaning's abyss, the impossibility not only of objectivity, but of objects, things whose sense has got to be shared, the stuff of sociality. And without that, the present exits, and possibility, like freedom, ceases to be an applicable metaphysical concept. Characters and concepts, moments in anachrony, events in emptiness, not to mention the international dateline that traverses the Pacific from north to south and back again and divides the future from the past. Everyday life in the mind as well as on the ground is rife with contradictions, but it's spring and artichokes are back on the shelves at the market. A few wearing an oval sticker saying, "Kissed by Frost" in Helvetica, all caps, black ink. Ha ha, Rosie Consuela Hassan is texting. The still bee continues as space speeds by in the leafy air of time. Thank you. Jimin Sa.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for Lyn Hejinian's words. Lola just doesn't seem like the horsey type, says Freya, Cyprian slight. Try cowgirl. Cowgirl? With irony, with no fear, says Noor. The correction is adamant. With rhetorical flourish, says Andre Micah Blake, he points to the door of the bar and the sunlit sidewalk in front of it, and Lola appears, dashing and jocular in devilish Western garb. She's wearing tight black jeans, a black embroidered long-sleeve snap-front shirt, a black Stetson with a blue headband and black round-top cowboy boots with whimsical blue stitching. And wit, that's Andre. Rhetoric, says Lola. She kisses Andre on the cheek. Rhetoric is a cave, and here we are. Hooray! We've retreated into it to escape our total destruction. Paradise can make itself scarce. That's the way of it. Metamorphosis is a shifty recurrence. Dust off a robin at 1 minute, and an opal in oatmeal the next, with nothing but disappearance between. That's the ticket. That's why poems take line breaks. It's harder for prose to counterpunch its stories, nearly impossible for data science to part with superstition. April yard mice and off-leash dogs moves around in the respective forms of life, and humans move around in theirs, guided by assumptions and bound to social mores, narratives of the way things have to be. Yellow sourgrass, like memory, with its circuit of dispatches, dissensions, dead ends, and perilous accords, clings to the deceptive surface of the continental crust high above meandering faults between plates afloat on liquid stone. But did you say omelet or omniscience when referring to the sun? Dream on, the sun sets, give reason a rest. There's ample evidence here of the ongoing incoherence of the real underfoot. The roots, gophers, rivulets, ditches, stones, worms. And when the sun comes up, look at the greens, their mobility. With a crash of breaking glass, the Reco-Volution truck collects its weekly haul of recyclable bottles, jars, cans, plastic, cardboard, and paper from the blue bins set against the curb. Yes, for what really happens to all that stuff, how do they define recycled? Or amor fati, an inquiry into that can't help but acknowledge absurdity, its jovial duplicities, its inefficient ways of getting from A to B, its scattershot preponderance in irrelevant reveries. Bonnie Rose Roberts, and yet to appear Tina, Colette, and Giselle. They are names noisy with friendship, inflated with play. To interpret their game is to play the clown and the ghost, to press the wrinkle on the lips. Guess that's just the way it is, as Leo X. Lee says. Improv. Interpretation is irrepressible, magical, a conduit of ecstasy. And its long riff on absurdity, it can't be stopped, as for love. And this, after all, is what Bonnie, Tina, Colette, and Giselle are learning to play. It puts a limit on human understanding and can't outlive it, to the benign perplexity, the gently uncomprehending look. These are gestures in the mise en scène, pieces of necessary equipment when playing for friendship and playing with love. The performance yields a set of anecdotes and observations intended to exemplify how a being, a person, character, figure, human, creature, maybe even a thing, means itself. What each intends or what each feels intended as and for. Giselle Hugo Roy looks up at the dark fir tree near the edge of the park as if it were a meteor or Mont Blanc, achieving sudden sublimity and entering her repertoire of fantasies, secret but not introspective, complete completely virtuous. Objectivity is impossible. It's beyond language's capabilities. Face it, it's beyond all of us. Giselle is experiencing powerful emotions in response to realizing that she is experiencing powerful emotions. And if subjectivity is, in fact, always intersubjectivity, isn't this only because one is subjectified by being objectified, made perceptible? And isn't it the case that around every subjectivity there's an impenetrable boundary, love, making it impossible for one ever to fully know or fully understand, understood by someone else, by anyone, one ever to be fully known or fully understood by someone else, by anyone? An unusual wind is coming up, pushing a low layer of battle ash gray clouds, darkening the sky and dulling the moment. Shadows are disappearing as ghosts might near the paradoxically light-dark end of a novel beset by an ambiguous, allegorical, or otherworldly atmosphere. Under the tree, like a cyber-serious, super-sensing dog, sits a single shoe. "I'm over here," Bonnie calls, and Giselle runs toward her. Giselle does not yet quite have the monologic perspective that social mores will make automatic. She does not yet ask how it would be if others see things as she does. The horizon is woven low and hanging far and apart. It's unearthly, no place for a tragedian, no place for an archaeologist. The ground is detection's fallen wall, casting a thin, wavering shadow when a nasturtium leaf on its wide, heretical pad extends an interrogatory green. Every question is like a shaky island of impious upheaval. The phrase is seized as if it were quarry and worse, misquoted. Ah, enter the spring mouse. The cat hasn't wasted her patience. Now cruelly she toys, her claws like commas, her tail exclamatory. She's engaged in an old crime. Or it's an old game to the very last detail, but it's never exactly the same. Let's call her Chardonnay. We build our nest with commas, adding stuff, adjusting things. Our nests are riddled with commas, and at the risk of sounding glib, they are riddled by them. Think how readily, how all but automatically our sympathies lie at hand to solve the riddle of life. How should we anticipate, and how should we do it, and where in the conviviality of a social space or under the bed? We live in a universe of instances and details, yes, but not separated from each other, not in isolation. But doesn't this, the notion of inseparable details and confluent instances, generalize them, deprive details of their detail, and sever instances from their instantiations? That is a rhetorical question, mischievously masking a proposition. Lola just doesn't seem like the horsey type, says Freya Cyprian Slight. Try cowgirl. Cowgirl? With irony, with no fear, says Noor. The correction is adamant, with rhetorical flourish, says Andre Micah Blake. He points to the door of the bar and the sunlit sidewalk in front of it, and Lola appears, dashing and jocular in devilish Western garb. She's wearing tight black jeans, a black embroidered long-sleeve snap-front shirt, a black Stetson with a blue headband, and black round-top cowboy boots with whimsical blue stitching. And wit, says Andre. Rhetoric, says Lola. She kisses Andre on the cheek. Rhetoric is a cave, and here we are. Hooray. We've retreated into it to escape our total destruction. Pythagoras, it's been said, accused Homer of lying about the gods after Pythagoras in a vision saw what he took to be Homer and what he took to be Hades, suffering the torments properly inflicted on liars. Teeth as hot coals, as hot as coals burning in a pit, tongue on fire, larynx liquefying. Homer, however, is a composite figure, an idea, a name in place of a person, a social being par excellence. According to Diogenes Laertius' account, Pythagoras told of the wanderings of his soul, how it migrated hither and thither, into how many plants and animals it had come, and all that it underwent in Hades, and all that the other souls there have to endure. Pythagoras was a sequential being, with alter egos experienced in a series of reincarnations under different names. Let us imagine that he remembered not as a witness, but as each being he was. He remembered as Wisteria, as a bullock, as Euphorbus, wounded, according to Homer, in the Iliad by Menelaus, without any false subjectivities along the way. But Homer had far greater social literacy than Pythagoras. In the classroom, Rosie Consuela Hassan raises a question whose possible answer her students, like ponderous summer bears or quick nocturnal raccoons, are trying to track as if through a forest, across a swamp, and down to a flickering beach, ground to grains. The task entails the applications of text to a matter at hand, much as a filmmaker sets image to music, or is it music to images? Latitudinal thinking discovers a cosmos comical in its coincidences, keeping its synchronies and its convergences in disguise or playing them out at deafening speed. Either way, for a moment at least, one history becomes indistinguishable from another. And here we have it, this beloved indeterminacy, rejection of efficient prose, the dismantling of representation, restless laughter in the stairwell as on the folding sea. Representatives disperse, scattering into a world, to quote Anthony J. Cascardi, that seems to be constructed around the principle of concealment. Representation hides in plain sight with names, the transparent cover up faint flickers of attention set out as small thin clouds bloom against the sky. Sylvie Winsorow in the sandbox throws off her shoes and begins to shovel sand into a yellow sock at the park. Sylvie concentrates, watching the ever-changing correlations of motion, moments, and things. No critique intervenes. Let's call this an inquiry into the conventions of the sock. Rhetoric, says Lola. She kisses Andre on the cheek. Rhetoric is a cave, and here we are. Hooray! We've retreated into it to escape our total destruction. Thank you. Next is Rachel Levitsky.
Printer issues, so on the computer. Thank you. I have a show and tell. This is a 2005 piece of ephemera from Belladonna's Chaplet series, reading series, and it is called Lola. This sort of preceded Saga Circus, which, well, I wrote something, so I'll mention it. Okay. I might say, and it would only, if any, be a slight exaggeration that I began Belladonna's series because of Lyn Hejinian, or Lynn E.J. Harrington and Leslie Scarlett Pino and Carla Harry Manhan and Gal Metis Scott. I mean to say that it was in reading these poets and prose writers and their politics that I got troubled over the separation of feminism and avant-garde as publishing and critical divides and wanted to bring them together. I wrote the blurb for Saga Circus, where Lola enters with a spine in 2008 or so, and on that blurb stressed the emotions in the names. I had been, after all, writing a book about the emotion, which Lynn ended up blurbing, and tickled me with her sad happiness about the thing. A sad book that made her happy is what she said. I still, thinking about it, get embarrassed by all my mento emotional stills of her grace. Lynn's grin when I first met her at a workshop in 1997, asking me if I wanted her to sign the book in order to make it more valuable. Lynn carrying a suitcase of Attilos books to Brooklyn herself at age 70 plus. Lynn's ample expressions of love and Lynn's humility is overwhelming and bringing of joy to all these sad days. And I just want to briefly shout out to Rachel Wilson, who without her, we would have never published Positions of the Sun, this beautiful book that Belladonna made of Lynn's that had originally been pieces of it had been inside of one of our elder series, and I've been teaching the long poem and thinking about these like long projects like Lola existing for 20 years and Positions of the Sun for 15 and things like that, so. Thank you. Matter never leaves meaning untouched, James I. Porter. To a name more or less barred from detours, some particular you or he or she or I, what can we add? Humans, memories of love and fucking, the latter of which is carried out under the auspices of love in the excellence of banal darkness. Each of us are the product of a fuck. Names, on the other hand, names, and if and when they appear, characters leap from the imagination. Xander, Blue Dallas, Reggie, Clara Toss, Aquo, Thomas Corey, and in better works, Dorothea Brooke, Janie Mae Crawford, Charles Swan. These aren't predicates, characteristics, characterizations. Micah Andre Blake. It should be easy to keep going, and even to stay lively. There's always a lot to do. And there's reality everywhere. But all speculative propositions, all statements of intention, all promises, all narrative realisms are absurd given the narrow scope of humanity's temporal consciousness. Its fixity, short-term imagination, fixedly short-term imagination. Our anticipations are for all but immediate. Time is lost, not only because of inattention or forgetfulness, but also by virtue of failed expectation and the failure of expectations. But we lose time, too, simply because of the limits of the future, or because the future doesn't, by definition, exist at all. It's not always our fault that we lose. As Nietzsche said, there are no isolated judgments. We very well might experience subjectivity as an interior presence, but it's not a single one. As for personality, how variably it plays about when others are around and even as occasional contextual disappointments flash. Julia Xanth Jones is an artist only for the sake of art, says Tony Van Heuvel, subsuming Jones's amorphous works into a category for which his best definition is, you know it when you see it. You think art is just a ball thrown into the air until it falls so we can kick it down the road to give us aesthetic distance? I may sometimes sound like a modern pop singer here, but she will not demand that the public be interested in my personal condition, unlike those individuals who force their personality into their poetry. Poetry is not for my concealed autobiography any more than it's for hers or for yours. Tragedy requires heroic tones, comedy the sounds of everyday life, as federal officers sneak about, seizing children who have taken off their shoes to run barefoot in the playground sand, rounding them up, loading them into a bus, and handing them over to private-public partnership for sorting, reshoeing, and release, to the custody of year-round boarding schools for shearing and education, preparation for bleeding and rage. The body aches, Maria Stepanova writes. It itches, it is full of fear. It tries and fails to forget itself, but the beholding eye moves freely and without haste, as if it were the air itself with its unlimited reserves of time. But we are really just watching blue marks on a grid. Racism, bay leaves, bed sheets, unemployment, bruised elbows, hypochondria, yard sales, droughts, rice cookers, email messages, burnout, mental health crises, corporatized education, and for-profit prisons, melting glaciers, toothpaste, pandemics, pine trees, salt, white vernal clouds, hand cream, peanut butter, tents, ATMs, gender violence, turnpikes, robins, mass shootings, home repairs, indexes, and lists and inventories. Oh, sorry. That sucks. Organizedly. I realize that I should try beginning yet again, interpreting. But interpreting what? Interpretation is perpetually disturbed, or both of them are, the beginning and the interpreting. And on what grounds are either possible? On what grounds is possibility possible? There are nothing but material grounds. All around us, matter exercises its erotic attraction, so that even the dead respond as their atoms and molecules shift, disperse, dissolve. If we take this proposition seriously, it follows that the dead don't, or don't necessarily stop. That said, all question of progress is moot. The second hand on the analog clock with hypnotic regularity takes its tiny jump from spot to spot and beguiles one into forgetting time. Making a return, realism could sweep all this away, and who could blame it, even if it were sometimes wrong? The names of birds, says Tamarin McGee, robin, finch, pigeon. Everyone knows robins and pigeons, obviously, says Pilar Piana Lee. Give us birds and to see. Pilar is certain, but not wrong. There are some propositions that, as Wittgenstein puts it, lie apart from the route traveled by inquiry. They provoke feeling, not emotion, but an a priori sense of something, an initial and immediate intuitive comprehension. It can be the shelf of a store and a wind turbine too, the whole elastic, so to speak, generating platitudes. Quote, to entertain is to be entertained. Quote, to appreciate is to gain an appreciation, and the like. There is more to where there is less than you might think, obviously, as Pilar would say. The produce market on Flats Ave has fresh English peas again, and Enrico Wren Roberts is adding some, potted and rinsed, to the leek risotto he's making. A chunk of Parmesan and a flat grater are already on the table. The green salad is lightly dressed, and 6 sea scallops, patted dry and sprinkled with black pepper, are on a plate ready to sear in butter as soon as the skillet's hot. Reggie Clara Toss looks up from the table where she's been sewing and asks, "What's for dinner?" And when in response to his answer, she says, "Amazing." Enrico lifts his wooden spoon and waves it like a baton, conducting her into rising from her chair and doing a plie. The violin arches, the quotidian is meaningless. Somewhere in fields, cows rest, and syllogistic logic comes up blank. The trick here is to regard the quotidian as an instrument and not just a theater for ethical life. Admittedly, limits to personal agency are set by the number of available options for action, but also by the purported agent's uncoordinated desires and incommensurate motives, which, without one's full knowledge, prompt one to act as one does. As an agent, one is poorly defined. Antonia Alice Martin, Max Murray Ritter, Cornelia Katrina Cabanatuan, Ulysses Theo Upton, Bonnie Rose Roberts, they carry on by dint of mobility and are all but invisible, like in wind, still, dishonest air. And thank you. And Claire Marie Stancic is next. Did I say that right?
The last time I saw Lyn in person was in September 2023. I was visiting California from Philadelphia to do a reading at UC Berkeley. And as part of this trip, Lyn, Jane Gregory, and I took the opportunity to meet for friendship and also for Neon Editions, the small chapbook press that we co-edited. The three of us sat around Lyn's dining room table, packing up our most recent Neon Editions book into envelopes for subscribers and making plans for our next publication. Our conversation turns to comparing the most embarrassing books we've never actually read. Lyn stood up, walked to one of the bookshelves that lined the room, pulled an enormous book off the shelf, and thumped it into the middle of the table. It was Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. When Jane and I confessed that we hadn't read it either, we decided to read it together. Over the next several months, until about a month before Lyn died, we read Robert Burton and shared our thoughts by email. Lyn was starting a new round of chemo. She wrote to tell us that the first session had been a breeze, and then she just as breezily went on to outline her thoughts on the reading she'd completed. The passage of Lola the Interpreter that I'm going to read from tonight includes a quotation from The Anatomy of Melancholy that Lyn also quoted in her correspondence with me and Jane. Lyn's notes are characteristically brilliant, insightful, witty, and reflective of her own priorities and preoccupations as a poet. And before I read from Lola, I want to read from one of these emails because I think that everything Lyn writes about Burton could also double as a reading and illumination of Lola. So here's Lyn's email, and for context, I should clarify that Democritus Jr. was the pseudonym under which Burton wrote The Anatomy of Melancholy. So Lyn writes, "The first things I note are, 1, the role Burton takes as a personate actor. Democritus Jr., son of the great pre-Socratic atomist philosopher Democritus, who was sometimes called the laughing philosopher, and whose theory of the nature of stuff, Heil, as atoms circulating randomly in a void and, when colliding, an accidental collision of motes in the sun, forming a material entity, everything being made up of atoms, has had lasting influence because it wasn't altogether wrong. 2, the style, copious, not unlike those accidentally colliding atoms / motes in the sun, and spirited, and not at all melancholy. There are abundant lists, sets of anaphora, each part of which is striking. There are many seeming digressions. He delights in his style. As a river runs, sometimes precipitate and swift, then dull and slow, now direct, then winding, now deep, then shallow, now muddy, then clear, now broad, then narrow, doth my style flow. Now serious, then light, now comical, then satirical, now more elaborate, then remiss, as the present subject required, or as at that time I was affected. 3, the subject matter. The matter of this my subject, melancholy, madness. And why he takes it on, because by his definition of what melancholy and madness mean, they affect everyone. He is writing a book for and about everyone. In her attention to Burton's use of characters, including the character of the narrator, in her appreciation of his expansive, radically inclusive style, the abundant lists, sets of anaphora, and seeming digressions, and in the democratic orientation of a subject matter for and about everyone, I think that Lyn was working through her aims for Lola the Interpreter when writing about the Anatomy of Melancholy. And now I'll read from Lola. How delicious absurdity once seemed, present, resonant, and full. Now absurdity is withered, dull. By sadness? Well, if we can't feel happiness, at least we can mime it. I can do that, certainly. Even until recently, I thought that life in all its plenitude and power was full of merriment, joy, beauties, vagaries, wonders, a panoply of distributed and redistributed realities, all more than merely apparent. Don't I still? And shouldn't I, at least for all practical purposes? How strange. I'm actually thinking this merrily, picking up the sounds of a squirrel somewhere in the sun outside the open windows of the gallery, moved by its rhythmic, vigorous chattering, scolding, defiant, warning, triumphant. The squirrel's sudden silence is definitive. Now, a moment, long enough, of well-being. Tony Van Heuvel swirls the spot of red light from his laser pointer around the bottom right corner of the painting before us. Here, in this area, the whole narrative we saw depicted in the painting comes to nothing. doesn't even leave a mark. A viewer would only see it if they came to the painting looking for nothing. Where will I be 10, 20, 90 years from now? Ashen, airborne, embedded in concrete, in transit underground, in the bark or heartwood of a tree, in a rat's viscera, mixed into the paint of a painting, a molecule of its lucent goo? What of the metaphysics, ruminations, concepts, propositions, questions heavy with intimations, the current communiques from lived experience as they fade from phenomenal reality? The exterior silence expands, the squirrel's silence, the ample silence of another, holding its own weight, its own beauty, which is its own meaninglessness and its own voluminous surprise. I can't determine if I'm the source, the continuation, or the destination of the electronic tolling of the alarm that sounds from my smartphone at 7:03 a.m., the anomalous time for which I've set it. I, not as self-same as a person is said to be. 5 minutes pass, and then a garbage truck stops noisily under the window as if intent on forcing to completion my progress from sleep to the waking world with its false, abundant, colliding, important, preposterous narratives, which in reality are just crowded closets or language lines only flimsily grammatical, or should we call them fuses, from the part. Using inductive logic, we think we can discover the whole, and from that, draw out the story in it. Returning to the part or parts, the process never comes to an end along the way, and along the way, we accumulate stuff and then feel virtuous by throwing most of it away. Farewell, blue skirt. Farewell, colander with holes in the mesh. Farewell, passing cloud in the shape of a man on his back, probably dead. Farewell, irreparable binoculars. Farewell, anthology of Victorian parlor verse. I repeat, one thing interprets another. Skyscraper, beetle, anxiety, infant at its restless guesswork. One way or another, things with their inexhaustible, generally mindless, impersonal, responsive mobility survive from one day to the next, as busy on Tuesday as on Monday or on the Monday before it, even while they're becoming different things. There's first this nematode, and then that. We can do a lot of interpreting without throwing jargon at it. Pippa Sidhu Petersdott puts $1 into the paper cup on Philip Kilmartin's lap. Pitying is an exercise of power. This is the essence of Nietzsche's case against pity. And when one's pity is rebuffed, one's power is denied. Philip Kilmartin nods his head and slips the $1 into the breast pocket of his plaid, muted brown, yellow, white, and pale green shirt. Pippa Sidhu Petersdott smiles at Philip Kilmartin, or at her power. Or she's responding to the slivers of light that flash between the leaves of the street trees along Ashen Avenue. Thought chastens thought, so prithee, judge again. This line is from Democritus to his little book, one of the 3 poems, or 4 if you count the initial Latin poem and the English translation that follows it as 2, with which Robert Burton prefaces the Anatomy of Melancholy, in which soon after he writes, "As a river runs, sometimes precipitate and swift, then dull and slow, now direct, then winding, now deep, then shallow, now muddy, then clear, now broad, then narrow, doth my style flow, now serious, then light, now comical, then satirical, now more elaborate, then remiss, as the present subject required, or as, at that time, I was affected." Having begun without haste, And with no real intention or even sense of what might result, I continue. But I should issue an invitation, inviting you into the cluttered hour or into the multitude of simultaneous moments, of wars, vacations, anxieties, the metamorphosing shadows of volleyball players in a park, the smell of tarp and melancholy near a sunlit tent encampment, the dirty dishes in the sink and sauces simmering on the stove, the energies and fatigues, and day by day, all the rest. Or into the proliferating, singular, world-form moments, lives strung like assorted beads on social threads, all selected by quirks of the cosmos, or the rambling or unraveling of the imagination. Through the night, something other than remembering is taking place. Multiple dreams, quickly, but each involving one or more encounters with an angry, biting animal. A war horse. Is there sunlight? Do I hear birds or trucks on the road? Am I alone and imploring, afraid? What am I experiencing? I won't pretend to understand the beings, characters I've named, or the situations I've set up. Who would? We don't even understand a table, though we understand that it is a table. We perceive far quicker and better than we understand, and we imagine even better than either, producing vivid, quick effects without any certain cause and no good explanation. Sometimes the war horse is rearing and black. Sometimes it's lunging and gray. There's no denouement. Next, we'll hear from Lytle Shaw.
The more I hear this lovely late style work, it's rich, philosophically complex, read out loud, the more I want to talk to Lyn about it. So I thank the project and Will for allowing another kind of conversation. I'm going to read a few sections from the 7th part and then the last little bit. Passing from one populous space to another, like an exile who has crossed a border or wanders unbordered in the dusty sunlight, it's fringed with the smell of horse dung, straw, barbecue smoke, but estranged, and like an amnesiac, some or all of whose past has been suddenly eclipsed, Lola walks through the weakly meandering crowd toward the barn beside the still, attentive, restive night. As English has it, one arrives at an understanding, which could be epistemological, an addition to knowledge or comprehension, a gain of new methods of orientation, or it could be contractual, an agreement, a mutual obligation, a binding arrangement, a reciprocal promise, which would require reorientation. But where has one come from? What was the point of departure prior to the arrival at a binding understanding? And is the result justice or wisdom or the building of a coalition, say an army or cartel or corporation or entrepreneurial startup, or a labor strike or a heist? Humans do a lot of things on the basis of their claims to so-called understanding. We need to speak, to sound the silence, and to love, whatever that may be, in its many potential malformations and complex contexts, with the happy confidence bolstered by misunderstanding or ignorance. We reach the hour of surrender, which we note as we note the rigid jollity of the casual techies over drinking in the Omega Lounge. What is personal life if not our habits, the way we do things? It composes us. Thinking is play, but there should be time for place and place for fun, real fun. as it's at a summer fair and carnival with buskers, guitar players, a flautist wearing a sequined yellow suit, fire eaters, tumblers, jugglers with lemons, cyclists performing tricks, people on stilts, a 3-member country girl group, mimes, the burning of an effigy, that draws the cops. Among them, people wander or stop to listen or wonder, children with melting cotton candy or being warned not to run with a lollipop in the mouth. Reality continues in its indifference to us and its differences for each of us as for clapper rails, elm trees, golden orb spiders and dingo dogs and mountain gorillas and dung beetles and herring gulls and earthworms and mica schists and chalcedony, volcanoes as they spew flaming lava, and sword ferns and ladybugs and white-crowned sparrows and guppies and anglerfish and blue whales and squid and horses at twilight of a hot summer day swatting their tails at flies in a field as a baby at play bats at balls on strings hung above his or her or their crib, or industriously picks at the torn edge of a floral wallpaper beside it. There is little, if anything, here that is counterfactual. Though full of fictions, these add to the basis for the phenomenal reality by existing because we perceive them and thus provide the speculatively interpretive basis for conceptual reality. Disjuncture is impossible. Stuff insists on mattering. Enter Enrico Wren Roberts. More than a name, it seems. He's a two-minded optimist, maintaining ethical ambivalence while feeling, and thus being, obliged to make a decision and act on it. Enrico Wren Roberts is under no illusion that he can do whatever he wants. He assumes his will is only partially his own, call it habit, or obligation, or determinism, or even call it a kind of freedom, he says. Logic tells us about our mental processes, the process of ideas, but little of the phenomenal world of which we're a fetching part. Their respective clarities clash. From the conceptual and its phenomenal times and spaces we built into it, the multiple world insists, neither in vanity nor in vain. Some acceptance is required, skeptical, unrelaxed. To accept is not to affirm. Enrico Wren Roberts attaches his name. Are you grieving over the unleaving of the trees? They will fall. As for the grief, it's political, social. We suffer an accumulation of losses. We can rant at the bigotry, the greed, the voluntary willed stupidity, the passion for fascism. But what can we do but grieve and suffer the political anger that is its medium? Sorrow follows, persistent as a hunch in the air. Free-floating sorrow attaches itself where it will as thick fog leaking light swirls around trees in the park, appearing to be drawn into their desire for chill, damp obscurity. But fog isn't a wanton sorrow drifting without tellable predictions, a pathological being self-same. The girls giggle in the foggy park, imagining a sailboat in trouble, Bonnie Rose Roberts, Colette Verdi Black, Tina Madhurmiti Sky, Giselle Huguet Roy, or slices of cucumber and aspic, says Colette, pushing a strand of black damp hair behind her ear. What's aspic? Asked Tina, with a hint of irritation. We mourn, unable to do the work of it. Inconsolable, we sorrow over the lost life process. As for the girls, they don't want to breathe less. Reason has bounced to it. A sprung poetics. That's how we deal with time. Full parallels bounce out wayside speculation, but they give rise only to thinking. Lola, the name rings against the cement. She feels her proximity to the edge of the vertical shadow from which swallows fly, and to which, swooping, they return as light on the bending surface and churning while the dark crocks of trees depict crows. And a raptor perched at the top of a redwood shines in the late, narrow sun. See? Tote sketch greets songy halt, link, bayside lilt, wag, weed. As time ticks by, we bound, leap, cavort to it to a reasonably unreasonable degree. We conjecture, speculate, we meditate, we will. Unreason calls out for interpretation. Absence is built into the whole melancholy of our microcosm. O for coffee, O for strength, a tree, fables, blueberries, fun, O for a dapple gray horse. We reason to contingent particulars by virtue of impetuous will. We want to see, we're pushy, curious, and often as impious as mosquitoes in the marginal night. The extraneous exists at extremes. It's out of things except the rigors of unreason, the vagaries of will and invention. Even as strange stuff makes its appearance, meditation undoes mental mechanisms, while the skeptic maintains a participatory distance, close to the processes that escape command. In some other book, there would be a sculpting poet, and stark poetry would stand away from him, or her, or them, who is some Ilya, or Camilla, or Eleonora, or Luke Philippe, or Olu, or Ping, or all of those. Why not? Indeed, how not? Uncertainty is the North Star, the seducer, the promise, the future. The earth will exist today and tomorrow as it did yesterday. Native coastal oak trees and non-native eucalyptus will continue to stand in the rain on the hills above the city with virtually no uncertainty, freely even. We can say that we know things like this. We can start with them. An aesthetic flourish adds complexity and, to some degree, uncertainty, pointedly beneficial, though it may unsettle common sense. The blue of the day out of the sky, a traffic of noise crossing the bay, interpretation of Lola in a chair. In time, it will be a sure sun that rises over the approaching horizon, as its sweet, ironic rain that soaks the thirsting land now. Skepticism requires refocusing, repurposing, reconnaissance, resistance, utilizing thought's capacity to be mobilized toward different ends. The skeptic makes a return.
Thanks so much. It was so nice to hear that book read out loud. I'm really overwhelmed and grateful to you all. One more round of applause for all of our readers. Yeah. And thank you all for coming out. That does it for the program and for this season. We'll see you at the New Year's Day Marathon, I hope. Yeah. Thank you all. Have a great night.